Today, we are going to discuss Mistborn Book 6, The Bands of Mourning, starting with the high-level summary. After that, we'll dive deeper into the main plot points, the new cultures and locations, the character relationships, the individual character arcs, and of course, the ending. The Bands of Mourning began 6 months after the end of Mistborn Book 5, and Wax was still very angry at Harmony for having lied to him about his wife Lessie, who had actually been a Kandra named Pa'am. As a result, Wax did not wear an earring during this book. In other words, Wax did not speak to Harmony, that is, not until he died. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Bands of Mourning began with the wedding, Wax and Steris. The wedding was interrupted so that a Kandra named Vendel could speak to Wax about an emergency. Vendel told Wax that another Kandra named ReLuur had found a temple in the south which might have the Bands of Mourning. Unfortunately, ReLuur was unable to clearly explain his findings since he had lost one of his spikes, and thus he had lost some of his memories as well as his sanity. So that was the primary mission. Wax and Co. went south looking for ReLuur's second spike, but it's worth noting that Wax did not agree to join until Vendel showed him a photo of his sister. In other words, the real reason that Wax joined was to rescue his sister from his uncle. They also went looking for the legendary Bands of Mourning, which they incorrectly thought to be the bands that the Lord ReLuur had worn. In truth, the Bands of Mourning was something created by Kelsier. Long story short, Wax and Co. went to a place called Site 1. They found ReLuur's spike, and they also found Telsin and quote-unquote rescued her. They then went to Site 2, which was a temple, in order to prevent Soot from getting the Bands of Mourning. Unfortunately, Telsin turned on Wax and shot him in the neck. Wax was able to escape down into a lower level of the temple, but Soot tracked him down and caved the ceiling in on Wax, injuring him even further. Soot was about to shoot Wax in the head, but Wayne showed up just in time to save Wax's life. But not for long. Wax was so badly wounded that he died. Before Wax passed into the beyond, Harmony met up with him as Harmony does for everyone. Meanwhile, Marasi found the Bands of Mourning, which were not actually bands at all. The Bands of Mourning had actually been hidden in plain sight. The Bands of Mourning was the spearhead from a Kelsier statue outside of the temple. When Marasi realized that, she drank in the power from the Bands of Mourning, but instead of fighting her captors, she flew inside the temple, found Wax, put the spearhead into his hand, and that allowed him to come back to life. Wax then flew out of the temple and captured his uncle's suit. Wax's sister, Telsin, escaped on the small airship. Wax brought some of the set back to Elendel for questioning, including Soot. However, a Kandra visited Soot in his jail cell, and it told Soot that plans had changed, that the timeline had been sped up, that they no longer needed civilization on this planet. The Kandra then blew Soot and itself up with dynamite. While all of this happened, Harmony was preoccupied, holding off a haze of red that was pressing in on the planet. That haze of red might be another god. That is a high-level recap of the book. Now, let's break it down in more detail, starting with the new characters, cultures, and locations. ReLuur is a Kandra of the 3rd generation. ReLuur discovered a temple and took pictures of a mural depicting the Bands of Mourning. He did not find the actual Bands of Mourning though. Instead, he decided to go back to the Kandra homeland, which is at the center of Elendel. On his way back home, he was ambushed in an outer city called New Saran. An explosion ripped off part of his body. He was forced to flee, leaving some of his flesh and one of his 2 spikes behind. As a reminder, Kandra have 2 spikes. When they lose one of their 2 spikes, they also lose memories and sanity. So, ReLuur went home and showed his fellow Kandra the pictures that he had taken, but he was unable to paint a clear picture since he was missing one of his spikes. That is why Vendel recruited Wax and Co. to find ReLuur's second spike. That is also why the first place the Wax and Co. went to was New Saran. The group went there and found out that a noblewoman named Kalasina had found ReLuur's spike and sent it to Soot at a place called Site 1. Now is a good time to talk about the people who created the airships. In order to do that, we have to go back over 300 years to an event known as the Final Ascension. At the end of the first Mistborn trilogy, Haze took up the shards of Ruin and Preservation. He became a new shard called Harmony. Harmony remade the planet, but it messed up the climate in the south. It became so cold there that many of the people died. That is why Northerners refer to the Final Ascension as the Catacendra, whereas the Southern Scadrians refer to the Final Ascension as the Ice Death. A decade after the Ice Death happened, Kelsier showed up and gave a tool called the Excisors to the Southern Scadrians. He taught them how to use the Excisors to create medallions in which they could store heat. The Southern Scadrians then used those medallions to stay warm and to survive. The Southern Scadrians also discovered a new metal called Et Metal. Et Metal is the god metal of Harmony himself. Another name for it is Harmonium. The Southern Scadrians use Et Metal to power airships. A group of Southern Scadrians called the Malwish crashed their airship during a storm, and that became known as Site 1. The set found that airship, captured its crew, and tortured and killed them in an attempt to find out how the airship worked so that they could replicate its technology for the sake of trade, travel, and warfare. The set was unable to find that out, but the set did find a map for the temple. Soot referred to the temple as Site 2. The Southern Scadrians also used the new metal called Et Metal to create bombs. A group of Southern Scadrians, known as the Hunters or the Fallen, flew an airship to Kelsier's temple with the intent of blowing it up so that no one could find and use the Bands of Mourning against them. However, Wax believed that when the Hunters got there, some of the crew changed their minds and tried to find the Bands of Mourning. Unfortunately for them, the temple was full of traps, so they died, but their airship with bombs was still outside the temple. After the big fight at the temple, Wax wanted to bring that airship back to Elendel so that his allies could study it. After all, the set had been studying the other airship over at Site 1. Steris convinced Wax to let the captain from the airship from Site 1 have the airship from Site 2 so that she could fly the remainder of her crew back to their home and the people they loved. Steris also told Wax that instead of studying the airship in hopes of replicating the technology before the set replicated it, they could simply buy airships from their new Southern allies. It's worth noting that there is also a group of Southern Scadrians called the Deniers of Masks. Not much is known of them yet, but Allik said that they are dangerous. So Elendel has begun a relationship with the Malwish people of Southern Scadrial, but not all of Southern Scadrial. Now, let's talk about the divisions within the North. When Harmony remade the world, he created what became known as the Elendel Basin. At the center of the basin is the city of Elendel, and at the center of Elendel is the Field of Rebirth. That is where Vin and Ellen died. When Harmony remade the world, he also moved the Pits of Hathsin and the Conjure Homeland there. So all of that is at the center of Elendel, which is the largest city in the Elendel Basin. The cities outside of Elendel are known as the Outer Cities. Most of the rivers flow to Elendel, and there are few train tracks between the outer cities. As a result, they cannot trade directly with one another. Instead, they have to ship their goods into Elendel and then out to the other outer cities. That means that they have to pay taxes to Elendel even when they're trading to other outer cities, and they do not like that. The outer cities feel oppressed and they are plotting a civil war. The governor of Elendel is a man named Aradel. Although he did not realize how much the outer cities were plotting against Elendel, he was worried about a gathering of elite in the outer city of New Saran, so he had planned on sending a representative there for that gathering. As luck may have it, Wax had decided to go out there to look for ReLuur Spike. So Wax went to New Saran as Elendel's representative, which gave him an excuse to mingle with the nobles while secretly looking for information on ReLuur Spike. Wax went to a party hosted by a woman named Kelisina who had been working with Soot. Unfortunately for her, Soot was not the best business partner. One of Soot's minions killed Kelisina, and another one ran off claiming that Wax had killed her. In other words, Soot tried to frame her death on Wax. At the time, Soot did this as a distraction. He had hoped that Wax would return home to Elendel. Unfortunately for him, Wax didn't go home. Marasi found a clue for Site 1, so they went there, then they flew to Site 2, where they captured Soot and brought him back to Elendel. Even though Soot was captured, the outer cities still feel oppressed. Moreover, Wax had gone to the party in New Saran as a representative of Elendel, and he was framed as having killed the host of the party. Therefore, the outer cities have one more reason to declare civil war against Elendel. However, Elendel has begun to form an alliance with some of the Southern Scadrians, and the Southern Scadrians have more advanced technology than the North. If Elendel is able to buy some of the Southern airships, then the outer cities might be hesitant to attack Elendel unless they create airships of their own. Before we dive into the magical side of things, such as the Red Haze and the worship of Trell, let's take a look at the main characters in terms of their relationships and also their individual character arcs. Towards the beginning of the book, Marasi told Wayne that she had moved on from Wax. She also told Wayne that Renette had a girlfriend, so he should probably move on from Renette. And he did. Before they left Elendel to go on their adventure, Wayne found Renette and gave her a notebook. On the final page of the notebook was a message: "Thank you and goodbye." As Wayne walked away, he whistled a song that had been playing the first day that they had met, suggesting that Wayne is a hopeless romantic. The group took a train from Elendil to New Saran. During that train ride, Soot had some of his minions attack the train in hopes of distracting Wax from their mission. Wax and Marasi fought off the bandits, but Wayne and MeLaan didn't help out because they had been down in a luggage department where it was loud, so they didn't even know that the train had been attacked. What were they doing down there? Wayne and MeLaan had hopped on the good foot and done the bad thing, and their relationship didn't end there. During the fight at the temple, Telsin stabbed MeLaan with a liquid that turned MeLaan into a mist wraith. Telsin then stole both of MeLaan's spikes, which meant that MeLaan was unable to reform. Wayne grabbed Wax's gun, found Telsin, and shot her in the head so as to get back the spikes, allowing MeLaan to get back her identity and reform. So Wayne and MeLaan were a thing. It is unclear whether or not it will last, but at the very least, they both care for each other as friends, and they had fun together. Marasi also found someone new, a man named Allik, who was one of the Southern Scadrians who wore masks. Let's put this into perspective. Wax and Co. left Elendil and took a train to New Saran. While they were there, Marasi and Wayne went to a graveyard to look for ReLuur's spike. They didn't find the spike, but they found a clue, which led them to Site 1, Dulcing, the site of the downed airship. They snuck into the research site, and Marasi and MeLaan found ReLuur's missing spike. Marasi also stumbled upon a prisoner named Allik. MeLaan didn't want to complicate their mission with some random new prisoner, but Marasi freed Allik from a cage anyway, and it paid off. When Marasi was shot, he ripped off a strip of cloth from his own shirt to bind her up. Then, he helped them escape Site 1 by flying off from a secret smaller airship within the big airship. Allik told Marasi about Southern Scadrial as he flew them over to Site 2, and she comforted him when he began to cry about his friends whom the set had tortured and killed at Site 1. Eventually, they got to Site 2, the temple. That's where the big fight happened. Wax defeated Soot, captured him, and captured some of his minions with the set. Afterwards, Allik and his former crew flew everyone back to Elendil. When they got there, Allik took off his mask and gave it to Marasi. Several of the characters, including Marasi herself, interpreted that as Allik having a crush on her, and it seemed as if she had a crush on him as well. Although Allik flew back to Southern Scadrial with his crew, he told Marasi that he planned on visiting Elendil in the future. Now, the big one, Wax and Steris. The book began with their wedding, but that wedding was interrupted, and that turned out to be a good thing. Over the course of their adventure, Steris came to life, and so did the love between her and Wax. On their train ride to New Saran, Wax told Steris that everyone had wanted to talk to him when Leslie had died, but she had just let him weep, which was what he had needed more than anything. Wax thanked Steris for that, and then he helped her comb through their house finances in search of 3 missing clips, which was a trivial amount, but he had fun doing it with her. More importantly, they bonded. Then the train was attacked. Towards the beginning of the fight, Steris helped out by giving Wax 3 vials of steel flakes that she had taken with her in case of an emergency. Later on, she climbed onto the top of the train car, picked up Wax's shotgun, and shot a very large Allomancer who was beating Wax. Unfortunately, the shotgun that she used was one of Renette's special shotguns. It was very powerful and had a very large kick. As a result, Steris was thrown off of the moving train as they passed over a river. Wax jumped off to save her, which involved a plunge into the cold river. When they flew back up to the bridge, Wax looked over at her, expecting to see her frightened and miserable. Instead, despite being dripping wet, she had a stupid grin on her face, eyes alight with excitement. When they got to the outer city of New Saran, they went to a party together, and Steris proved herself valuable more than once. First off, she had brought a liquid that induces vomiting in case they had been poisoned. She drank some of that liquid and threw up, which gave them an excuse to leave the party and trail Kelesina. On top of that, Steris revealed that she had snuck a gun into the party by taping it to her leg. Wax found Kelesina in a room speaking to Soot through a device, but one of Soot's minions killed Kelesina, and another of Soot's minions ran off yelling that Wax had killed her, so they had to leave the party quickly. When Wax and Steris got outside, he began to stress over being implicated and what his late wife Leslie would say. But then, he looked over at Steris and stopped thinking about Leslie. He thought to himself that Steris was gorgeous, like an uncut emerald sitting in the middle of a pile of fakes. He flew up above the mist with Steris in his arms, and he held him there. He looked down at her and suddenly found something burning in him like a metal. a protectiveness for Steris, a woman so full of logic and yet so full of wonder at the same time. He also felt a powerful affection for her, so he let himself kiss her. At first, she was surprised by it, but she melted into the embrace. They started to drift sideways and arc down as he lost his balance on his anchors, but he held on to the kiss, letting them slip back down into the churning mist. Steris accompanied them to Site 1 as well as Site 2, so she was there for the entire adventure, and she helped out many times in her own ways, most notably by leading the final negotiation between Wax and Captain Jordis. Steris convinced Wax to let Jordis take the airship so that she could fly her people back to their home and the people they loved. Steris also told Wax that instead of studying the airship in hopes of replicating the technology before the set replicated it, they could simply trade with their new Southern allies. Steris also convinced both Wax and Jordis to let the Kandra take care of the Bands of Mourning. When they got back to Elendel at the end of the book, Wax immediately brought Steris to a survivorist priest and asked her to marry him. Not because words on a paper said that they had to marry, but because he wanted to. Wax told her that he was painfully tired of being alone, and she was incredible. In response, she kissed him. So the book began with their wedding getting interrupted, and it's implied that the book ended with them finally getting married. This time for love. Time to talk about Wayne. When Wayne was younger, he accidentally shot a man, a father. Every month, Wayne gives half of his money to the family of the man whom he killed. Nevertheless, Wayne hates himself for killing that man, which is why he cannot even hold a gun without shaking. Back in the day, Wax had found Wayne after he killed that man, but Wax saved Wayne's life by preventing Wayne from being hanged. Wayne became Wax's loyal sidekick, his friend, his little brother. Wayne believed that Wax had been the one person who had believed in him, the only one man who had forgiven him and encouraged him. That is why it hurt so much when he saw Wax die. When Wax died, Wayne, a man who cannot even hold a gun without shaking, grabbed Wax's shotgun and left the temple. He found Wax's sister, Telsin, and shot her in the head so as to get back the 3 spikes. ReLuur's missing spike, as well as both of MeLaan's spikes. But here's the thing. Although Wayne shot her in the head, he had known, or at least suspected, that she would survive, since he had seen a spike sticking out of her and assumed that at least one of her spikes would be the power of healing. So Wayne hadn't actually tried to kill her. He just wanted to get MeLaan's spikes back. Later on, Wayne told Wax that he had thought Wax was dead forever. But Wax had given him a second chance at life so many years ago, and he figured that the last thing that he could do for Wax was give Wax's sister a second chance. Little did Wayne know, Wax thought to himself that he wished she were dead. Only time will tell whether or not Wayne's decision backfires or pays off, but either way, it was the right decision for him. Hopefully, Wayne has begun to forgive himself for his past. Marasi also had a great arc. When Marasi was in the graveyard, she saw a statue of Vin and reflected back on her past, how for years she had wanted to be Vin, the Ascendant Warrior. That was actually the reason why Marasi had joined the Ladies' Target Club in the first place. Marasi had figured that if she couldn't push bits of metal around, a gun was the closest she could get. At the university, Marasi took classes on how the Ascendant Warrior was a model for self-actualized women, but she liked lacy dresses and smelling like flowers, and she liked living in the city where she could demand modern conveniences. Marasi came to the conclusion that she didn't want to put on trousers and be like Vin, but she felt like a coward for admitting that sometimes. Marasi once argued that she did want to change the city, but she felt that tracking down every criminal and punching holes in them with pieces of metal moving at high speeds was a terribly inefficient way of doing it. Instead of hiring more constables and hanging more criminals, Marasi believed in the broken window theory, which is that crime goes down when a city cleans up its environment. With all that said, Marasi proved herself capable many times over during battles. She kept her composure, she shot people, she got shot herself, and she used her speed bubbles in various ways to save the lives of her friends and defeat her foes. But a year and a half working with Waxillium hadn't made killing any easier. She thought to herself that if you had to shoot a man, then society had already failed. When they were on the train, Marasi asked Wayne if it ever bothered him to be in Wax's shadow, and Wayne said no, but it did bother Marasi. She told him that she had studied law because she had wanted to become something others thought she couldn't become. She got the job at the precinct and thought that she'd accomplished something, but Aradel later admitted that he was first interested in hiring her because he had wanted someone who could get close to and keep an eye on Waxillium. On top of that, whenever Marasi accomplished something, everyone assumed that she had Waxillium's help. Sometimes, it made her feel as if she were no more than an appendage. Some of that was true, but a lot of that was actually just a reflection of her own insecurities. Eventually, Marasi seized on an opportunity to overcome those insecurities. When Marasi was held hostage outside of the temple, she thought to herself that it's no wonder that she stood in Wax's shadow when that's all she could see herself doing. When Soot said that Wax was dead, Marasi decided that she needed to solve the situation, and she did. Marasi realized that the spearhead lying at her feet wasn't aluminum. It was actually 16 different metals melded together. The reason that Wax had not been able to detect an elementic pulse from it was because the spearhead was the most heavily invested metal mine that they had ever seen. The spearhead was the Bands of Mourning. She reached down, grabbed the spearhead, clutched it in her two hands, and tapped everything. Power flowed into her, lighting her up like an inferno. She flew into the sky and began to toss around her captors with ease. In that moment, she was the Ascendant Warrior. Since she had burned every metal, she had every power. She held the fullness of what Waxillium had barely tasted his whole life. She could be him. She could eclipse him. She could bring justice to entire peoples. But, holding it all within her, having it and measuring it, she finally admitted the truth to herself. This isn't what I want, she thought. Marasi decided that her childhood dreams would no longer hold sway over her. She smiled, then threw herself through the air in a push towards the temple. Marasi placed the Bands of Mourning into Wax's hand and effectively brought him back to life. In the aftermath of the fight, Marasi reflected on it. In her mind's eye, Wayne trudged through the snow, gun to his shoulder, a pattern of frozen blood flaking his skin. Alongside this image was the glee with which Waxillium had launched into the sky to chase down his uncle. There was a darkness to these men that the stories hadn't conveyed. Marasi was glad for it, but she had stepped to that ledge, then turned back. Proud though she was of having fulfilled her mission for the Kandra, she had decided that things would be different for her in the future, and she was alright with that. Now, it's time to talk about Harmony. The book began with a Wax flashback from 28 years earlier. Since Wax's mother's side is Steris, Wax spent a year living in the forested area of Elendil called the Village. During this flashback, Wax found a young twin-born named Forge who was cutting open another boy. Wax risked his own life to save that boy by fighting Forge. That was the start of his lifetime as a lawman. At the end of the prior book, Wax found out that the rogue Kandra was actually his wife, Lessie. When he found that out, he felt as if Harmony and the Kandras had manipulated him, played him, and lied to him. The result? A dead woman in his arms. That is why he was reluctant to help Vendel go out and find ReLuur's missing Spike. In the end, he chose to join the adventure because Vendel showed him a picture of his sister. Although Wax joined the hunting party, he did not wear an earring because he was still very angry with Harmony, whom he considered to be an impotent god. But things changed after he died. Before Wax passed into the beyond, Harmony spoke to him as Harmony does with everyone. Harmony explained to Wax that the part of him that used to be Sazed could see things the way that Wax did, but Harmony was no longer Sazed. Harmony was a combination of Sazed, ruin, and preservation, and thus he was limited by what he could do. Wax countered that he had seen Harmony proactively make moves, so he knew that it was possible. He asked Harmony why he didn't at least prevent the worst things from happening. In response, Harmony brought Wax up into space and showed Wax that there was a haze of red pressing in on the planet, a miasma of dread and destruction, as well as a thin strip of light, like a bubble around the world, stopping it. Harmony did not know what the red haze was, and that scared him. In other words, Wax had asked Harmony why he didn't at least protect them from the worst things, and it turned out Harmony was doing just so. We will get back to Wax, but first, let's talk about the Red Haze and Trell. ReLuur is the conjurer who found the temple before the events of this story. When he went home, He showed the other Kandra photos that he had taken and tried to tell them what he remembered. Unfortunately, ReLuur was missing a spike, so there were holes in his memory and he was not entirely sane. ReLuur drew a sketch of a monster. The image was that of a burning red face, a distorted mouth, horns and spikes streaking out along the rim. It had black eyes, drawn like voids on the red skin. ReLuur said that it was a beast that had fallen from the sky. When Marasi first met the Southern Scadrian named Allik, he ran up to the side of his cage with the red mask on. Marasi's initial thought was that he looked like ReLuur's sketch of a monster. So that might be it. ReLuur may have just been drawing the Southern Scadrians who had crash-landed from the sky. However, ReLuur also said that the darkness above is of the void, that it had no eyes but it looked at him, that it was still looking at him. That sounds like a god, and it just so happens that there is a haze of red surrounding the planet, a red haze which might be another god named Trell. Trell has a number of known followers. Miles' 100 Lives worship Trell. In fact, the very last thing he said before the shooting squad killed him was, "Worship Trell and wait." MeLaan and Marasi came to believe that Trell was involved in what had happened to Lessie, the Kandra named Pa'am with the spike of an unknown metal. The manager of a cemetery in New Saran used the word Trell in a way that most people use the terms rust and ruin, so he might have been a follower of Trell, and Suit and the set were definitely working for Trell. Last but not least, there are Kandra with red eyes that work for Trell. At the end of the Bands of Mourning, one of those Kandra showed up to Suit's prison cell and it blew them up. So what is Trell? Miles' 100 Lives was a follower of Trellism, which might be related to an old religion called Trelligism. Trelligism was around long before the Lord ReLuur. It was one of the many religions that Harmony had memorized when he was still Sazed. In fact, Sazed once told Vin that Trelligism was the perfect religion for her. Trell was a god whom a northern group known as the Nelizan worshipped. In their land, the day and night cycle was very odd. During some months of the year, it was dark for most of the day. During the summer, however, it only grew dark for a few hours at a time. The Nelizan believed that there was beauty in darkness, and that daylight was more profane. They saw the stars as 1,000 eyes of Trell watching them. The sun was the single jealous eye of Trell's brother, Nault. Since Nault had only one eye, he made it blaze brightly to outshine his brother. The Nelizan, however, were not impressed, and preferred to worship the quiet Trell, who watched over them even when Nault obscured the sky. Trelligism was a vague religion which allowed men to discover truth for themselves. In other words, Trelligism left a lot open to interpretation. The response to half of Sazed's questions about the religion had been, "Ask Trell and he will answer." Sazed had always been partial to Trelligism due to its focus on learning and the study of mathematics and the heavens. That might explain why Suit's organization has so many mathematical terms and nicknames. The organization is called the Set. Telson's nickname was Sequence, and Professor Irich was known as an Array. All of those are mathematical terms. It's also worth noting that when Sazed became Harmony and reshaped the world, he used star charts to help him put the planet back to where it was supposed to sit in orbit. Those star charts came from the old religion of Trelligism. So Trelligism is an old religion about a god looking down on the planet from the sky. It just so happens that there was a mysterious red haze surrounding the planet, and ReLuur felt as if he was being watched. In theory, a new god might have arrived to the planet and co-opted the religion of Trelligism as a way of gaining and manipulating followers to do its bidding. The last thing to talk about in terms of this new god is the unknown metal. The very last thing that Miles' 100 Lives ever said was, "Worship Trell and wait." But before that, he told the firing squad that men of gold and red, bearers of the final metal, will come and take over. He might have been referring to the unknown metal, and if so, his final statements were a clue that the unknown metal is related to the new god named Trell. It is unclear whether or not Miles' 100 Lives was spiked, but Pa'am's new spike was a silvery metal with dark red spots, like rusted bits. Tensoon found similar spikes inside of the chimeras that had attacked him and Wax in the Kandra homeland. Pa'am also spiked a man named Rion, but it is unclear what metal that was. Regardless, MeLaan and Marasi believe that Pa'am's unknown metal relates to the mysterious new god named Trell. How are they going to face a god? Since Harmony is both ruin and preservation, his hands are tied in some ways. Thankfully, he has a sword named Waxillium Ladrian. Wax had always been concerned about doing what was right, and he had always been a lawman of sorts, even when he was a child. But when he first went to the roughs, he did it for the money. He also did it because he liked the hunt. Find who did it, find the secrets, find the answers. But there was another part, the part Miles' 100 lives had forced Wax to admit. There was a certain perverse anger the lawman directed at those who broke the law. Almost a jealousy. How dare these people escape? How dare they go to places nobody else was allowed to? Wax knew that he felt this way, and he judged himself for feeling that way. After Telson shot Wax 3 times, he escaped down into a pit. As he crawled toward a light, he surprisingly found himself whispering for Harmony. Then he began to think about his sister. How long had she been working with them? He hated that he'd guessed. Hated that his first instinct, even if he'd been right, had been to pull a gun on his only sibling. Not long after, Wax crawled to what he thought might be the Bands of Mourning, but Soot found him and set off one of the traps so as to cave the ceiling in on them. Soot was able to heal himself, but Wax was not so lucky. Soot held a gun to Wax's head and was about to pull the trigger, but Wayne showed up just in time to save Wax's life, though not for long. Wax died. Even with other pressing matters, Harmony always finds time to take the final walk with the dead, since he considered it among his most sacred duties. Wax yelled at Harmony for letting Leslie die and having Wax be the one to kill her. Harmony countered by asking Wax how long he was going to hate himself for that. Wax could feel it inside of him. Hatred for Harmony, hatred for the world, and hatred for himself. When Harmony asked if Wax would have preferred if someone else had killed Leslie, someone who she hadn't known, Wax said no. When Harmony asked if Wax would have preferred for Leslie to live on, a slave in her mind, corrupted by that cursed spike that would forever leave her scarred, even if replaced, Wax cried and said no. So Wax began to realize that he would never have been able to pull the trigger unless his eyes had been veiled from the truth. In other words, Wax began to realize that Harmony had not been wrong to lie to him, and Wax himself had not been wrong to do it. When Marasi placed the spearhead into Wax's cold fingers, Harmony reached out both of his hands, giving Wax a choice. His right hand was freedom, and Wax could feel it, an adventure into the unknown, seeking only the fulfillment of his own curiosity. It was glorious. It was what he'd always wanted, and its lure thrummed through him. Then, Harmony held up his other hand, and Wax heard a voice, a frantic, feminine voice telling him that he has to know what it does and begging him to heal himself. Wax asked Harmony if the other hand was duty. "No, Waxillium," Harmony said gently, "although that is how you've always seen it. Duty or freedom, burden or adventure." Harmony went on to tell Wax that he had always been the one who made the right choice when others played, and Wax resented that. Wax tried to deny it, but Harmony just smiled. Harmony then explained that his second hand was not duty. It was but a different adventure. Once again, Wax heard Marasi's voice choked with emotion, telling him to tap the metal mind. So he reached toward the left hand, but Harmony shockingly pulled it away and asked, "Are you certain?" "I have to," Wax said. "Do you?" "I have to," he said again. "It's who I am." "Then perhaps," Harmony said, "you should stop hating that, my son." Harmony extended his hand, but Wax hesitated. "Tell me one thing first. Did she come here when she passed?" Harmony smiled. "She asked me to look after you." With that, Wax seized Harmony's left hand and warmth bathed him. Then it became a fire. Wax came back to life in an explosion of power. Wax used that power to capture Soot and his minions. When the dust settled, the Southern Scadrian airship captain named Jordis told Wax that the Bands of Mourning belonged to her people. But Wax had felt the power, and it was scary even in his own hands. He did not want the Bands of Mourning being used against his people, so they came to an agreement. Wax gave the Bands of Mourning to MeLaan so that the Kandra would look after them. Wax was glad to know that they were effectively out of his reach. Too much power, he thought. So Wax no longer hates the Kandra, he no longer hates Harmony, and most importantly, he no longer hates himself. And that's a good thing, since there is a mysterious haze of red pressing in on the planet, and it is going to require all hands on deck. Now, the ending. While Aradil questioned the prisoners and prepared for war while hoping for peace, Marasi focused on the rumors. Tales of men with red eyes who visited in the night. Research about an ancient god named Trell that people were somehow worshipping again. A god that had crafted spikes to corrupt the Kandra Pa'am, and whose name was on the lips of many of the prisoners. She'd spent months researching and so far felt like she knew nothing, but she would find answers one way or another. The set had been planning for events a century or more away, putting careful plots in motion at Soot's suggestion. He was proud of those, but truth be told, he'd rather they rule in his lifetime. When he got the airship to work, he had thought that was a possibility. Granted, Wax came back to life and captured him. While Marasi studied the rumors, Soot was questioned, but he didn't break, so he didn't spill any of the set's secrets. After 2 weeks of captivity, a creature with softly glowing red eyes visited Soot. It might have been what Miles' 100 Lives had been talking about when he said that men of gold and red, bearers of the final metal, would come and take over. Soot thought of the creature as a faceless immortal, which implies that it was a Kandra with softly glowing red eyes. That creature told him that they no longer needed the set to manage civilization since recent advances had made civilization there too dangerous. The creature said that they had decided to remove life on that sphere instead. It thanked Soot for his service, claiming that he would be allowed to serve in another realm. Then it blew them both up. Wax woke up to the sound of that explosion. He looked over onto a table and noticed the mysterious coin that the beggar named Hoyd had given to him. That coin resembled the medallions that the Southern Scadrians used as metal mines, so Wax finally realized that the coin was also a metal mine, a copper mine, a metal mine that stored memories. The next thing he knew, Wax was in a different place, looking through the eyes of a different man, or rather, the eye of a different man, for only half of the viewer's eyesight was normal. The other was all in blue, lines everywhere. Wax was in a vision of a man spiked through the eye. Wax walked into a town where people were huddled inside of a bunker, and he kneeled down and whispered a single word to one of the elders. Survive. It was only then that Wax noticed his arm inside of the memory. Wax's arm was lined with a network of scars layered atop one another. In that memory, Wax had been the survivor himself. Kelsier. There is always another secret.